Hey listeners, with fall in full swing, it's the perfect time to refresh your wardrobe with pieces that feel as good as they look. Luckily, Quince makes it easy to look polished, stay warm, and save big without compromising on quality. Quince has all the elevated essentials for fall. Think 100% Mongolian cashmere from $50, washable silk tops and skirts, and perfectly tailored denim, all at prices that feel too good to be true. By partnering directly with ethical top-tier factories, Quince cuts out the middleman to deliver luxury, quality pieces at half the price of similar brands. I've been loving so many of the home goods, including their cozy blankets, such as the organic cotton channel stitch coverlet. It's the perfect addition to warm up your house for the fall, so keep it classic and cozy this fall with long-lasting staples from Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's quince.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. quince.com/POTC.
The biggest reason to change your personality or to, just experiment with changing it would be that it might make you happier. That a lot of these things can start to sound like it's so people will like you better, but that's really not the motivation that comes up in this research. It's really more that the people who make these changes end up feeling happier and have better, quote unquote, well-being in sciencey terms. So it's something to do for your own health and your own happiness and for changing the way you live your own life and not for other people.
That was Olga Khazan on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey listeners, this is Jill's daughter Spencer. You're about to jump into my mom's interview with Olga Khazan. But first, just a quick reminder to stay tuned until the end where you can hear her co-host debrief, and also a reminder that you can now listen to the podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on the POTC website or go to patreon.com/offtheclockpsych. And if Patreon isn't for you, but you want to help my mom and her team out, you can do so by sharing this episode with someone you think might benefit from hearing about personality change. Now here's the show.
Hey everybody, it's Jill here, and I'm so pleased to introduce today's guest, Olga Khazan. She has written for the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, Vox, and other publications. She is a 2-time recipient of the International Reporting Project's Journalism Fellowship and winner of the 2017 National Headliner Award for Magazine Online Writing. She lives with her husband and son in Northern Virginia. Olga, welcome to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to talk about this book. I enjoyed reading this so much. I don't know if you're familiar with Florence Williams. She wrote a couple books, but her most recent one is called Heartbreak, which I talked about with her on episode 343. But like you, she is also a journalist. And both of your books, they're autobiographical and detail a lot of your own personal journey, but then they're also like really well researched and journalistic. I think Florence actually called hers a journalistic memoir, if I'm remembering correctly. And I just love this style. Like, what an engaging way to learn. And on top of that, you are hilarious. Like, I was laughing out loud throughout the book. And as a self-described introvert, I think I was sort of surprised, which I shouldn't have been. There's nothing to say that introverts are not funny, but you are hilarious. And that made it even that much more enjoyable to read.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's so nice to hear.
Yeah. Would you call it a journalistic memoir? Is that like what you aimed for?
I guess so. Yeah. I guess I do a lot of these like guinea pig type things where I kind of dive into a situation and kind of see how it works on me. or at least that's what I decided to do in this case. So a journalistic memoir is a good term for it. Yeah.
Yeah. And hers was about her divorce. And then she did, and it was all like, journalistic research around the science of heartbreak.
Huh.
And I just find it so fascinating. I think it's really cool. Well, why don't we start there with a little bit about your story, since you said this is like a personal project. So tell us a little bit about what inspired you to take this journey into personality and to endeavor to change your own and then write a book about it.
Yeah, I guess the short version is that I just wasn't very happy. There was nothing particularly wrong about my life. I just always seemed to find the negative side of everything that was happening. So I kind of was just always really anxious and worried about whatever was coming next. And then something good would happen and I would start worrying about the next thing. And I also was really socially isolated. I'd moved to the suburbs before I started working on the book, and I didn't have a lot of friends, and my friends didn't have cars, so they never came out to see me. And I just kind of felt like, my life is like not really going the way I want it to. And then as I kind of was researching and reporting more about personality change research, I kind of saw that both of those things have roots in personality, that our personalities kind of determine how we relate to the world to a great degree, and that you can actually change your personality. So that's kind of where I jumped off and what I decided to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because what I would think most people might do is either assume that it was because of these external issues. Oh, I should probably move because I live too far away and nobody can get to me, or blaming the circumstances and changing the circumstances, or I need to go to therapy. I'm anxious. I have to go see an anxiety therapist. And of course, I am an anxiety therapist, so that's why people come to me. But this idea of like, let me delve into personality and see if I can change my personality. Because for a very long time, it really has been thought that personality was mostly set and not amenable to change, but that is no longer the prevailing thought. So can you talk a little bit about that, the impermanence of personality and what kinds of factors seem to influence it?
Yeah, you're right that, many years ago, scientists sort of thought that you kind of get what you get when you're born and that's your personality. And then, you're stuck with it for life. Now we think that people are more or less recognizable from, childhood into old age, but that we all do change. We all change even if we don't particularly want to change. The situations that we put ourselves into, where we live, who we're around, whether we're married, what kind of jobs we have, kind of exert an influence on our personalities. And so we change gradually over time. And then on top of that, what my book delves into is this concept of volitional personality change, where you actually do something in an attempt to change your personality more quickly than it would naturally change over time. And it's interesting that you said therapy, because I was actually already in therapy when I kind of started working on this. But much of like what therapy has been shown to do is personality change, actually. Yeah. Like that's like what a lot of therapists are trying to accomplish. I don't know. I guess they don't always call it that with their clients.
Yeah, I think in therapy, you think of it more as thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. But when you define personality in the book, it's about your thoughts and feelings and behaviors. So
yeah.
what it really made me think about that. I thought, we don't think of it as personality change in therapy, but why is that? Like, I think we're actually saying the same thing. We're just using a different language.
Yeah. I mean, and there's actually some studies that show that even a short course of therapy helps reduce the level of the personality trait of neuroticism by this very significant degree that normally would take years and years and years to kind of accomplish. So it is possible that therapy could be one way that someone could pursue some types of personality change.
Yeah. I thought it was fascinating that you point out that you are who you socialize with, you are who you date, that a lot of times, even if you're not volitionally trying to change your personality, that your context tends to influence your personality. You know what? Let's define it. Since we are talking about like, maybe it's the same thing, but we're speaking different languages. Is there a universally agreed upon definition of personality? And if not, how did you define it for the book? So at least everyone who's listening is all on the same page about what exactly we're talking about here.
Yeah. So Brent Roberts, who's sort of this OG personality researcher, defines it as thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that come most naturally to you in a given situation. Like when that email comes up on your inbox, or when someone says something to you, or when something happens, what's like the first thought that's in your head, or what do you do for it? Yeah, your default, right? Now, Nate Hudson, who is the researcher who studies personality change, has sort of an addendum to that, which is the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that serve some purpose in your life. And what that basically gets at is that everything we do, either consciously or subconsciously, we're kind of moving towards a goal of some kind. Like we're either, maybe trying to make more friends. And so we're kind of playing up our extroversion a little bit in order to accomplish that goal. Maybe we're trying to get promoted at work. So we're kind of trying to become more conscientious so that we can do that. We all have things that we're trying to do in life, and our personality is almost like a tool for accomplishing those things.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And do we know where personality is thought to fall in the nature-nurture debate?
Yeah, so it's about half and half. So neither,
like everything.
Yeah, neither gets totally off the hook. So when I say like half genetic, of course, people start to think like, that means I'm half like my mother. No, it doesn't mean that. It just means your genes kind of write the program, for like 50% of your personality. And the other half is up to environmental factors, as scientists call it, which actually does not mean like the trees and the forests and things. It means like who you're around, your peers, your job, where you live, other things that you experience that influence your personality.
Yeah. You used this great cooking metaphor in the book. And I remember writing a note like, oh my God, I love this. Can you share that? I think it was related to the nature nurture aspect.
Yeah, this is to help people understand why, even though you get genes from your parents, you're not exactly like your parents. So your genes are kind of like a pantry of ingredients. And this is Catherine Page Hardin, a geneticist who explained this to me. So you get like, eggs and flour and sugar and, whatever else in this pantry. But the way that you put them together and the circumstances of your life, so like how hot your oven is and like how long you bake it for, all determine what you're going to get at the end. Like, do you get an omelet? Do you get a souffle? Do you get cookies? Like, none of those things are identical, but they have the same ingredients. So that's kind of another way to understand it.
Yeah, I loved that. I thought that really made it stick, made it understandable, as metaphors often do. So let's dig into the 5-factor model, because that's really the kind of most widely agreed upon model for personality. And the acronym for that is OCEAN, OCEAN. So will you walk us through what each of those 5 factors and their counterparts are, what they mean?
Yeah, so OCEAN is a good way to remember them. The first one is openness to experiences, which is sort of like imaginativeness, creativity, kind of just like how honestly open you are to new ideas and experiences. And low openness would be sort of someone who's like very traditional, kind of likes to eat the same thing for lunch every day, things like that. So then you have conscientiousness. High conscientiousness would be someone who's always on time, who gets everything done, has the to-do list and the Google Calendar. They don't misplace things often. They're very like goal-oriented. And low conscientiousness can actually look a lot like ADHD. So it can almost be like kind of scatterbrained, basically. Extroversion, we all kind of know what that is. It's basically people. They love to talk. They love to do things. They love to be around others. Introverts, by contrast, prefer to spend a lot of time by themselves. Agreeableness, which is more like warmth and empathy. So it's sort of like the quality of your relationships with other people. So not just how many friends you have, but like, are they like these deep friends that you've had your whole life? And do you have a lot of conflict with them? And so very agreeable people kind of are low conflict, have a ton of friends, good relationships with others. Disagreeable people may have more conflict and just kind of are more confrontational. And then N for neuroticism. Neuroticism is a quote unquote bad thing. It's kind of correlated with depression and anxiety. Those are the two main facets of it. And then the opposite of neuroticism is what scientists call emotional stability. I think they called it that in order to be like gentler, like, oh, you're low in emotional stability. But then someone who recently told me that sounds even worse. Having a neuroticism. So I was like, I think in trying to like soften the blow, they like actually made people feel even worse about that trait.
It's funny how language does that.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I had written because I want to go through some of these in detail, but I specifically say in the chapter on conscientiousness, where I very much saw myself and was thinking, oh, we are birds of a feather, because I know you're very high on conscientiousness too. But I couldn't help but wonder if a large proportion of those who score low in that area might be neurodivergent and have executive functioning difficulties, because that's exactly what I was thinking too. I'm high on conscientiousness. My husband and both of my children all have ADHD and they are the opposite. But I really see the reason they are the opposite is because they have this different brain that results in executive functioning difficulties. And I think when the 5-factor model first came out decades ago, there was not a lot of attention on this. So do you know if there's any more contemporary research that has looked at, like, are there people low on conscientiousness that are not neurodivergent? Or is that really how we would best understand the difference? I mean, of course, this all exists on a continuum. It's not just high-low, but is there even any research on that that's current?
Yeah, I did a little bit of poking into that, and then I cut it from the book, which now I think I should have maybe left it in because everyone has asked about this.
They have, yeah.
So as far as I understand it, it's like extremely low. Everything is a spectrum, right? All of these traits are spectra. So it's not like I'm a total introvert or I'm a total extrovert. Like you're probably somewhere in the middle. So same with conscientiousness. And basically, as I understand it, the people who are low to very low on that may have something like ADHD, or it may at least manifest as ADHD. But kind of the good news is that other than like stimulants or the other ADHD medications, the personality change way to deal with that or to increase conscientiousness is the same way you would do it even if you don't have ADHD. So it's just like creating systems where like you pack your backpack the night before and you have a checklist and you have a reminder to check your checklist, So the doctors who work with people and kids who have ADHD just kind of help them create more systems to be conscientious.
Right.
It's not like a different kind of thing that you have to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it would be interesting to see if there are people who are lower on conscientiousness but don't meet criteria for ADHD. Will they more readily respond to conscientiousness interventions versus somebody who, kind of has a different brain? Like I know, for folks who aren't on ADHD meds, for example, a lot of times those behavioral interventions can be tricky because you have to remember to make the sticky note. You have to remember to look at the sticky note. It's the executive functioning gets in the way of even remembering to do the kind of behavioral interventions that you have. So yeah, it would be interesting to kind of to look at some of those differences. Are there any caveats in terms of like the validity of the Big Five? Or is this like pretty widely accepted that like this is as good as it gets when it comes to understanding personality?
It is sort of as good as it gets. And there are caveats in the sense that like anytime you study people, there's going to be stuff that pops up that not everyone kind of agrees on, right?
Sure.
Like you can never get a totally uniform measure of all of humanity. We think the Big Five is like more or less true. We think it's mostly true across like most countries, but there are some cultures where some of these traits are like not very important, or they are like confused by what scientists mean by them. Like openness is like not really a big deal in some cultures. And then some cultures actually have a trait that's like honesty that is very important and is like more important than openness. And so if we were measuring this according to them, that should be in the Big Five instead. And there is an alternate model called Hexaco, but Western research psychologists don't like to use that one. They feel it's not as valid as the Big Five. So the Big Five is sort of what we have. It's what I went with. But yes, like you can and will find like little caveats to basically anything.
To anything, right?
Yes.
I mean, anything that's still a theory that isn't 100% proven, which is pretty much everything in psychology, is going to have that. Well, okay, so let's actually talk about personality change. So you note in the book that researchers, for the most part, all agree that the key to personality change is altering thoughts and actions, and that we can do this by basically remembering to act the way we would like to be consistently, bit by bit, through persistence and repetition, and that it's important to believe that you can change, like we know from Carol Dweck's research on fixed versus growth mindset. And that sounds very simple, but of course, it's a lot easier said than done, which, those of us who are therapists or therapy clients know all too well. So let's talk about how we do this. So for your own experiment, you decided to start with trying to increase your extroversion. So tell us like what you learned, what you did, and how that went.
Yeah. So for extroversion, it's one of those where like you don't really have to think about it. You just kind of have to do it. You just have to go out and talk to people. I did a lot of extreme things, but the average person would just have to go socialize with some people, most days of the week for a few minutes. It can be like a small conversation at the coffee shop or whatever. I signed up for improv and sailing. Those are my two big kind of challenges that I did. And I found I really enjoyed both of them a lot more than I thought I would. I am not a natural born improviser. I don't like to be up on stage. I don't even like it when people look at me. I honestly had not done any kind of comedy, or I wasn't even familiar with what improv even really was before I did it. And I found that it was such an engaging and creative way to interact with other people. And it was, honestly, it's just very fun and immersive. So I really highly recommend it to anyone. And what I kind of noticed about the extroversion activities that I enjoyed is that they involved doing something other than just chatting. That one reason why I had been, shying away from or not maybe being as extroverted as I felt is that I didn't like the sit face to face in a bar and drink your drinks and catch up kind of interaction. It was good to an extent, but I found it a little bit old. It would get old or get boring for me sometimes.
And you wanted something to do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I found that I really enjoyed the activities where there was something you're doing at the same time that you're chatting. Because that was the same in sailing. It's you say a few words and then you do the knot and you move the jib or whatever. You're always doing something. There's ropes and stuff you have to pull on. And I actually like that. I like having a group activity. And so I really recommend that for introverts who are I don't want to go to parties. I don't want to, sit in bars and talk to people. Don't just go to an activity where you have an excuse to do something while you're talking to the people.
It's so interesting and it makes so much sense. I bet it resonates with a lot of people. I'm actually thinking of my 13-year-old daughter who has lots of friends at school. She had a lot of social anxiety, but that's gotten better. She's in theater. She plays the violin. She plays softball, but she doesn't do she's too old to use this word, but play dates. She never has people over. And I always assumed it's because it's unscripted. There's all this uncertainty and pressure of what are you supposed to say? And what are you supposed to do? Because you're just there. And if you're not a natural extrovert, when she's an introvert, an extroverted conversationalist, that's a lot of pressure. But when you have knots to make and jibs to raise and comedy to learn, which is funny because I am very much a natural extrovert, but doing improv, never in a billion years would I do that. That just seems like the biggest, scariest thing. And so I think what it boils down to for people who are listening is there are so many right ways to do this.
Yes.
And like you were saying, there's research that shows even these really small micro moments of being more extroverted, they count. There was a phrase in your book that said even micro social moments make us feel woven into the social fabric. I loved that. And those small things can matter, or you can do big things, but you can find your thing. It doesn't have to be something, that might sound really scary like improv, or it doesn't have to be just sitting in a bar talking that might feel really scary to other people who need the thing to focus on. And
exactly. I would just try things until you find something that works for your style of socializing.
Yeah. Now you must have talked to Kelly Leonard on his podcast.
Yes.
And if not, okay.
Yes.
If not, we need to make sure we introduce you.
He was great. Yeah.
Yeah. He's been on this podcast, and then I was on his podcast as well. He's amazing. I love him. But I'm sure he loved that you did improv as your way to work on being more extroverted.
This summer, I've started asking myself a question. Could I maybe have ADHD? It's a question that has come up more frequently as we've had guests on our podcast who have discussed this topic. The jury is still out on it and probably will be for a while longer, but I am consuming a lot of resources on the topic, and one podcast that I have been binging is ADHD Aha. And that was a long time before they actually became a sponsor of this show. Every episode, ADHD Aha has a guest on who talks about the moment they realized that they have ADHD, how it showed up for them, and how they adjusted to it. In an episode with Jesse Anderson, for example, that I listened to this morning, he talks about the difference between importance-based task management and interest-based task management. And I thought, wait, that's me. So for someone like me who only has a surface understanding of what ADHD actually is about, this is incredibly interesting and useful. To listen to ADHD Aha, search for ADHD Aha in your podcast app. That's ADHD Aha with Aha spelled AHA and an exclamation point at the end because it's really that good.
So this is one of the things you talk about, and I could absolutely see clients of mine saying this, like, what would you say to people if they say, but if I act extroverted when I'm an introvert, that's inauthentic. Like that feels like I'm faking it. How would you respond to someone where like their resistance came up in that form?
So first of all, like anytime you do something that's a little bit unfamiliar, you're going to feel a little bit like you're faking it, right? Like the first time you go for a jog, if you've never run before, you're going to be like, what am I even doing? I look so silly. Everyone else is running faster than me. I'm like a fake jogger. But everyone had that first like fake jogger moment. Like sometimes just being a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit, unfamiliar with what you're doing can feel inauthentic. But there's no research that suggests that like occasionally pushing past your comfort zone is bad or harmful in any way. It just kind of stretches the bounds of what you can do. Because eventually in life, like you will be called upon to be extroverted in some way. Like you're going to have to give a presentation at work or give a toast at a wedding. So it's like a nice thing to like use that muscle and build it up, so that you at least know that you can, even if you don't choose to do it all the time.
Well, and thinking about this authenticity, inauthenticity is sort of assuming personality doesn't change. Like I am an introvert. That is who I am. And if I act any differently, it's inauthentic. But what you say in your book is like, that's not actually the case, that these are fluid constructs. And if you authentically desire to be able to be a little bit more extroverted, then you're being authentic. It's just uncomfortable because you don't do it very often and you're not used to it.
Yeah. I mean, ask any new parent if they feel like an authentic mom on the first day they bring home their baby.
Nope. Yeah. Anything you do for the first time, you're right. Yeah. And that like my most recent book is all about the imposter phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And, the whole argument of the book is like not waiting until you feel confident or skillful or ready. It's doing this thing you care about doing well, that's challenging to you, even if that means having to do it in the presence of self-doubt and discomfort. Because of course, when you're doing something challenging that you care about doing well, especially if it's new, it might feel inauthentic, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you saw neuroticism as your biggest personal challenge. So tell us a little bit about what you tried there and what was or wasn't helpful.
So neuroticism is one of those where you have to really want it and internalize and like kind of be like, I would like to be less anxious in order for it to kind of work. And really, like a lot of the interventions for neuroticism, some of them are more CBT, like thinking about your situation in a different way. Like, is it really so bad? Am I overreacting? Am I black or white thinking? A lot of them, though, are really just mindfulness, meditation, yoga, exercise, things that kind of are working in the background to clear some of the anxiety without you necessarily thinking about anything in particular. And so I signed up for a really intense meditation program that required 45 minutes of meditation a day. It did not feel like it was working even for a second of those 45 minutes. I felt like this is a huge waste of time. I don't even know why I signed up for this. And it honestly worked really well. It brought down my neuroticism.
It just took a while.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
It took months. And it was a really intense class, but it brought down my neuroticism score significantly. And a lot of it was like these kind of mindful or like Buddhist teachings that they told us along the way that like, I honestly still sometimes recall to myself because I tend to thought spiral when I'm anxious. And like, for me, it helps to have like one little, like one liner to kind of think about whenever I'm spiraling. And that helps me. And I can't promise that this will work if you are not this exact type of person, but that is what worked for me.
What's your favorite one-liner? Can you think of one?
Yeah. So one of them is actually not from a Buddhist. It's from David Axelrod, who's a Democratic strategist. And
well, that's appropriate for someone who's in the DC area.
Yeah. So sorry if this is too wonky, but it's basically like, okay, how do you deal with the fact that like you can try so hard and you can work so hard on something and it still might not work out the way you want it to, right? And that is like a big source of anxiety for people who are anxious.
Yeah.
And what he says is all we can do is all we can do, which just means that all you can do is try really, really hard, put everything you have into it, go leave it all on the field, push as hard as you can. But then the outcomes are not up to you, which is also what the Buddhists would say. You can never control outcomes. Sometimes things just happen the way they happen, and you can't blame yourself for those outcomes. You can only, try again the next time. And for me, that was really comforting because I did have a tendency to blame myself for outcomes.
Yeah. I think that is so critically important. In fact, it's exactly what I did a TEDx talk back in 2020, and that's exactly what the topic was. Because I think, especially in Western cultures, like we are taught that you set a goal and goals are typically outcomes. And if you achieve it, you're a success. And if you fail to achieve it, you're a failure. But so often it's out of our control, right? Like you can be the best writer in the world and write an amazing book and get all the best blurbs and do all the right things. And like whether it hits a bestseller list or not is like, there are a lot of other factors that determine that. And so it's this idea of like, you can only do what you can do. So it's like, do what you can do to make your outcome more likely, but hold the outcome more lightly.
Yes.
And that is a hard shift for people to make. It's again, one of those like pretty simple concepts. When you hear it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But then to actually be able to do that it can be challenging because it's really not how we're programmed socially.
Yeah. And it's not how people talk about goals normally.
Right.
Like, just do it, or like, it's all
But
very
that's
all
how
or
we
nothing.
talk to our kids. We never say to our kids like, oh, you lost the game, you're a failure. We're like, you tried so hard. You really gave it your all out there, but God forbid we talk to ourselves that way. We're so mean to ourselves.
Exactly.
Even if we can't control it when there's so many other factors. The other thing that kept popping into my head, and I'm curious if this resonates for you, is, my co-host and I, we all do a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. Much of it is borrowed actually from Buddhism. And one of the ideas is that like, when you're unwilling to have something, you have it. So there's this metaphor that's like, okay, Olga, I'm going to hook you up to my anxiety detector machine. Mm-hmm. And as long as you don't get anxious, you're going to be totally fine. But if you get anxious, it's going to deliver a lethal shock and you're going to die. But just don't get anxious and you'll be fine. But what's going to happen?
You get anxious.
You get anxious and you die. Not because the incentive isn't high, right? Our life is our highest incentive. But if you think about the relationship you now have to anxiety, you're going, oh my God, I can't get anxious. Anxiety is dangerous. Anxiety is bad. If I get anxious, I'm going to die. So I can't get anxious. So now you're anxious about anxiety. So you're anxious. And so I wonder, and I think this is really what meditation ends up doing because you're in the present, you're just with whatever is already here anyway. But it's like, as long as we're saying to ourselves, anxiety is bad and dangerous and I can't have it, I have to find the right tool to make it go away. We're fighting an uphill battle because we're anxious about anxiety. So we're anxious. And, my clients always say, oh, okay, so then if I'm like willing to have the anxiety, then will my anxiety go away? No, your anxiety will do what anxiety does, which is what all your feelings do. They come and go.
Yeah.
They ebb and flow. But when we can like be in that present moment and allow our feelings to do what our feelings do, then it doesn't get like stuck in this high point. So does that resonate at all? Like maybe the early part of your journal with meditation when you're like, it's not working. It's not working, right? You're like anxious about anxiety. So you're anxious.
Yeah. And John Kabat-Zinn, who like developed the type of meditation that I did, he, in his book, he writes how like the first step of this meditation is to stop trying to make yourself not anxious.
Yeah.
Like the goal is not to like make the anxiety go away. Just sit there, like just be with whatever comes up. And kind of like try to live moment to moment. And that kind of was like at times too esoteric for me. But I mean, hearing you explain it, I think it really is, it falls in line with acceptance and commitment therapy. Because that too, and I interviewed Stephen Hayes for the book. And it's basically like about not avoiding negative feelings and that like just knowing that they're going to come up and like, what are you going to do anyway?
And interestingly, even though the goal is not getting rid of the feelings, when you do that, that does tend to be the byproduct. Of course, you'll still have anxiety. It will come and go. But, the rates of what would constitute an anxiety disorder or probably very high neuroticism do tend to go down as a result of that.
Yeah. And you're also not as, sometimes like having a bad feeling, it can be like, I shouldn't be having this. And it does. It feels very
Right.
scary. And people almost react more negatively to the bad feeling than they would if just the situation was happening, but, they weren't also like castigating themselves for feeling bad.
Absolutely. I think like that has lots of names, but a lot of times you'll hear like clean pain and dirty pain, right?
Yeah.
Like my partner broke up with me, and so I'm feeling this like sadness and grief, and that's the clean pain. And then if I'm like, you're such a loser, you should be over this. He was a jerk anyway. Why are you so upset? That's the dirty pain where there's like so much more suffering. Like, of course there's going to be pain. This is a hard situation, but we create more suffering with that, like judging and layering on.
Yeah.
Okay, so you give a link to a test. So, and we can put this in the show notes, but there's actually a free test online if you want to find out where you rate. Do you know it off the top of your head?
Personalityassessor.com.
Personalityassessor.com. So I took the personalityassessor.com test, and I was actually pretty high on everything. Not neuroticism, high on emotional stability, because that's the way the test does it. But I was not high on openness.
Oh.
And I was surprised. Like the way that you described openness, I would have thought like, oh yeah, I'm definitely high on openness. And some of the things you talk about in the book, like I'm politically liberal, I'm spiritual, but not religious. I enjoy writing, music, travel. But I think I know why I scored low. I hate and avoid poetry and other things I can't understand. So my husband gives me such a hard time because he loves time travel. I hate it because it doesn't make sense to me. I don't like quantum physics. Don't talk to me about Schrodinger and his cat. That's stupid. I don't like weird, like heady books and movies that have these like abstract themes. And I don't like doing things that I'm not good at. So I think like those, but there were a lot of questions in there about abstract art and poetry.
Yeah.
Like I feel like maybe they need to focus a little less, but all of that made me score really low on openness. And I this was like shocking to me. I really thought of myself as being open. So what would you recommend I or anyone else listening who's low on openness? What might we try if we wanted to try to increase our openness?
So great question. So I also know someone else who was really offended by her low openness score and like texted me immediately, and I was like, sorry. So I think this is like pretty common. So the challenge is that people who are low in openness often don't want to become high in at least that facet of openness. Because as you mentioned, you don't like that stuff. You don't like poetry or, abstract art or whatever else, time travel. You're not drawn to these things, so you're not encountering them at all. So you're probably not going to encounter some mind-blowing, time travel movie that just changes your mind about time travel. But what I would say is that like one thing you can do is just regular travel, not to different times, but just different countries. Because sometimes there's something about like being in a setting where you really don't understand anything that's going on and seeing how these things are valuable to different cultures. So when I went to Portugal, for some reason I didn't write about this, but it ended up being like really interesting to me, which is they have this really cool tile museum. Like they're all about making art on tiles. And some of them are like very strange and like don't really seem like good artwork to me. But there was something about like seeing them in this museum and reading about like, okay, this is why like this tile was important to these people at the time and like why they painted the horses in this really weird way that doesn't look like a horse. It kind of like helped contextualize the importance of these tiles so that by the end of your journey through the many different types of tiles of Portugal, you're like, oh, wow, tiles are so cool. Like tiles are the perfect way to like convey information. Even though they're clearly not. And so, I bought 2 tiles and now I just have them, even though like they're not as cool in Fairfax.
I love it.
And so I don't know, maybe something like that could, kind of put these things that can feel really random or like, I don't get this, or why is this important into like a context that feels more meaningful.
Yeah. Well, one thing I did do, and I have to admit it wasn't deliberately trying to increase my openness, but I do think it was an example of trying to be more open, which is I am normally, even though I said I'm more spiritual than religious, I'm generally I'm kind of not either of those things, and have, really been more of like an atheist, and like when you die, you turn to dirt. And I went and met with a psychic, like with an intuitive, which I have never done before. And is normally not something I would do. And it was awesome. I loved it. Like, I'm not going to start meeting with a psychic every week or every month and like live my life necessarily based on all of that feedback, but I really got a lot out of it. And I surprised myself, and the experience surprised me. And then that made me want to be more open to things. And I think the reason I don't like them, whether it's poetry or art, or even that, it's because I can't understand it in a concrete, like if you were to give me a test about it, I couldn't get an A on it. So I don't like it. Like that's the conscientious part of me, I guess. And so anyway, that like felt like I noticed myself kind of cracking open a little bit as I was doing that.
This always happens to me when like I'll read a magazine article about something that I'm like, this is BS, like this isn't true, like starting out, and then I'll read the whole thing and then I'll be like, okay, this person has a point. Like I'm like, right. Okay. Like, yeah, this is compelling. I don't know. I feel that way about so many. That's because I'm very open. So it's like very, I don't know. Sometimes I can be like easily persuaded because of that.
Well, one of the things you talk about is the downsides to each of these, because I think for the most part, being high on everything, including emotional stability, so low on neuroticism, being higher on those traits is correlated with like health and well-being and happiness, right? It's generally thought to be better. But you also talk about some of the downsides, like if you're kind of too conscientious or too extrovert. So for anyone who takes the test and feels bad about their scores, can you talk a little bit about the sort of pros and cons of these, like landing in different places on these continua?
Yeah. So for most of these, you want to be high, but not too high. Like you probably don't want to be like at 100%, or at least you want to have the ability to like switch on and off a little bit, like depending on the situation. So that's like Catherine Page Harden and Brian Little have more of an opinion that like it's not being high or low. It's more like, can you adjust a little bit depending on the situation? Because like,
are you flexible based on the context?
Yes. Yeah.
And what's called for.
Because if you think about agreeableness, right? Like, it helps to be agreeable if you're making friends or trying to solidify friendships. But if you're arguing with your child's school about accommodations, or something like that, you don't want to be agreeable. You don't want to just give in or say it doesn't matter. You really want to like fight pretty hard and be pretty confrontational. That doesn't make you a bad person. That's adaptive to just the needs that we all have in our lives. And, similarly, like we're all going to have times we need to be more extroverted. We all have times when we really have to finish that PhD dissertation or whatever. And like, we need to be introverted. And so I wouldn't say that like you're bad or you have a bad personality if you're not like all the way up on any of these.
So in therapy, I am often telling clients that what we're trying to do in therapy is strike a balance between acceptance and change. So for example, I run an anxiety clinic in California. And if I'm seeing someone for, say, social anxiety, social phobia, our goal is probably going to be to change the symptoms enough so that they're no longer interfering in their functioning and their ability to like do the things that matter to them that they want to do. But I tell the client, like, no matter how successful therapy is, you're not going to come out of this in 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months being the class clown or like suddenly have craving being in the spotlight. And so there's this element of changing the things that aren't working for you, that are holding you back in some way. But also there's this element of like accepting this other part of you that like might not change, and that's okay. So like with personality change, how do you recommend listeners think about that? Like think about what or whether they should accept versus strive to change.
Yeah, great point. And I mean, honestly, like very similar to how you just described it. I mean, first of all, we're all going to have certain traits that we're A-okay on and do not need to change. So I'm really high on conscientiousness and really high on openness. And I never tried to change those. I like played around to see like what influences, both, but I didn't meaningfully, honestly change on either of those. So first of all, everyone has strengths that you can build on, maybe to change other things that you do want to change. But, even with things where, you really do want to make significant progress, let's say on neuroticism, a little bit of anxiety is adaptive. Like we get scared for people who are never worried and like aren't concerned about how things are going to turn out. Yeah. Like, because they make other people anxious. And you kind of want to know what to do with that anxiety, or like how to process that anxiety, how to keep it from taking over your life. You don't want anxiety to prevent you from making decisions or from taking important risks that are calculated and reasonable, but risks. So to me, it's more about like, okay, I'm going to hang on to the positive elements of this trait, everything that's gotten me to where I've gotten, but I'm going to change the stuff that is holding me back from going even further.
Yeah. And I think for some people, maybe taking a moment to even look at the positive elements. I know people who would think my introversion is all bad and I should be an extrovert. It's better to be an extrovert. And that is not necessarily true. And in fact, there's a lot of reading you can find out there about the positive elements of being an introvert. And, I think it goes back to what we were talking about before is, context matters. And I talk to clients a lot about how, let's say going to a party, for example, that what I want is for you to consciously and deliberately choose whether to go to that party or not based on your values, like who and how you want to be. And so if you're really craving connection, if you're lonely, if you recognize that you've been avoiding social situations because you're more of an introvert and it feels scary, but there's a cost to that, then I'd like you to try saying yes more, because we know how important social relationships are to our physical and mental health and well-being. And at the same time, if you have been traveling for work and you've had to be on every single night, going to all of the events, and you come home and you get invited to a party and you say, you know what, I am exhausted. And tonight I want to choose like self-care. And that means just decompressing and being by myself and recharging, then that's okay too. But either way, it's thoughtful, it's deliberate. It's not just this autopilot. I'm doing the thing that's the most comfortable without thinking that through.
That's exactly right. And the values element has, the personality literature often relies on like, okay, well, what are your values? Because the things that you want to do are going to motivate your personality change. Like if it's not important to you to do well at work and to, get to work on time and to accomplish all your projects, you're probably not going to want to become more conscientious. The people that I interviewed who increased in conscientiousness really significantly, it was when they had stuff they wanted to achieve that conscientiousness required. They didn't just, all of a sudden wake up and want to fold all their socks and organize them. They were like, I am tired of living like this. I'm not accomplishing my goals. My goals are important to me. And so they changed what they were doing. And Brian Little calls them like personal projects. Steve Hayes calls them values. But everyone has like that big thing that they want that, they are willing to adjust their behaviors for.
Right. I'll admit a lot of times when I was reading it, I was thinking, like my kids and my husband, they'd score high on this and low on this. And I was thinking, is there anything I can do to make my son want to ball up his socks and put them away in his drawer? Probably not, because he doesn't care.
Yeah.
Like maybe someday he will, like when he lives with roommates and they care and it affects their relationship. But, seeing some of those things, I'm like, you're high on this and low on this. How can I take some of these lessons from Olga's book? But it can't be something that I think other people should change. It has to be something that they feel like is important.
Yeah,
change.
Maybe when he gets a girlfriend or like, she's really like upset about the socks.
You're a slob,
yeah,
right?
It has to be something that's important to that person.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that we didn't cover that you think would be helpful or interesting for our listeners to know?
Yeah, I would say the biggest reason to change your personality or to, just experiment with changing it would be that it might make you happier. That a lot of these things can start to sound like it's so people will like you better, but that's really not the motivation that comes up in this research. It's really more that the people who make these changes end up feeling happier and have better, quote unquote, well-being in sciencey terms. So it's something to do for your own health and your own happiness and for changing the way you live your own life and not for other people.
I love that. And so what about you? Do you feel like this was a successful experiment? Do you feel happier? Have the changes stuck?
Yes.
Or is it something you have to constantly work on?
I do have to constantly work at some of them, but I am way more extroverted. I have like 3 social things this weekend, and that might be like my limit, but I'm feeling great about it. And just today on the drive to Starbucks, I was like, we can't truly know if anything is totally good or bad because we don't know how everything will turn out. And telling myself some of these lessons from the meditation class.
Right. Remember, hold the outcome lightly.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
I give my clients this mantra in trying to change their relationship to their feelings. That's this is uncomfortable, but it's just a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
It is temporary. It is not dangerous, and I can handle it. So kind of like you were saying, you need to have mantras. I'm you're going to hear me say this so many times, but to me, a big part of, if you're going to do anything in this realm of personality change, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable because it's hard to do something that's different from what you normally do. And, I've told this story before, but I was asked to do this talk for teenagers, this amazing organization called Kyle Cares, and they wanted me to give takeaway actionable advice that would improve their mental health and reduce their liability to suicide. And I only had 25 minutes.
No pressure.
And I was it takes me 6 months to do that with my therapy clients. And I meet with them one-on-one for 50 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. How am I going to do this? But it actually came to me quite quickly. I thought, gosh, if there was one thing I could teach every human on the planet that I know would dramatically change their lives, it would be getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Because think about how many choices we make because we don't want to feel a certain way. And I was thinking about that with all the personality change stuff too. What would make it hard? Well, it's not your default mode. And anytime you're doing something different, it's probably going to be uncomfortable. But it's temporary. It's just a feeling. You can handle it. It's not dangerous. And so if you're willing to be with that discomfort in improv or just saying hi to the coffee person or being open to tiles in Portugal, there's really a lot of room for how things can change and improve.
Yeah, I love that. I hope those kids take it to heart.
I do too. Well, they keep inviting me back every year. So
good.
I must be doing something right. Well, like I said, this book was so funny. Your husband also sounds very funny too. There were a few times you talked about him and things that he said or did. I'm oh, you guys must be really fun to hang out with.
He has his moments.
Yeah. But it was entertaining and interesting and helpful and informative. I mean, it hit all the right notes. So I loved reading it. Thank you so much for joining me. If other people want to find the book, where's the best place that they can do that?
Yeah, the book is Me But Better, and it's available everywhere books are sold. And you can find more of my writing about personality change on my Substack at olgahazan.substack.com. And I'm a writer for The Atlantic, which is at theatlantic.com.
Fabulous. Excellent. Well, we will link to all of that in our show notes, and I will find you on Substack. I'm there too.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.
Hey, everybody. Here we are in our co-host post, and I'm here with Debbie to unpack the episode you just listened to with Olga Khazan. Debbie, you said you had all sorts of thoughts about this one.
So many thoughts about it. This topic is very near and dear to my heart because in graduate school, I did my dissertation research on childhood temperament and on how some of these factors are somewhat stable and these kind of questions about nature and nurture, but also how this is very, very complicated stuff. And so this is something that I've been really interested in for a long time. And in fact, I just want to remind our listeners that if you're interested in this topic and want to take another dive into this, go back and check out episode 112 that I did with Yael. It's on temperament. We called it Nature versus Nurture or something like that. And
Nature versus Nurture, Why Temperament Matters with Debbie and Yael.
Yes, that's right. It was a co-host episode. And we talked a lot about research and the complexity of this. And so, if this got you interested, definitely take a listen to that as well. It's slightly different, I think, talking about temperament versus personality.
Yeah. But it seems like part of where that overlap is people assume when we talk about temperament or personality that these are fixed traits, that if you're an introvert, you're an introvert. If you're an extrovert, you're an extrovert. And what I thought was great about this episode is that Olga says, no, that's actually not the case, that if these are things that you have a desire to change, they are changeable.
Absolutely. And I love that she approached it this way because I think these are very complex. They are not, set in stone forever. They're on a continuum. We think about these personality constructs like introversion, extroversion, it's not all or nothing, right? It's absolutely on a continuum. Most people are somewhere in the middle. Sometimes it changes over the course of time. And I actually, as I was listening, I kept thinking about the ACT concept of self as content and self as context, and how sometimes we want to understand ourselves and we come up with these sort of self stories to try to make sense of ourselves and our place in the world. And we can sometimes actually limit ourselves a little bit if we latch on too strongly to a label like that. I'm an introvert, right?
Yeah. Right. And you were talking earlier before we hit record about the popularity of tests like the Enneagram and the Myers-Briggs. And even you and I both, with this interview, hopped right on and took that 5-factor personality quiz. And, I think as humans, we're really interested in understanding ourselves. And that's great. That curiosity is great. But it can also end up being to our detriment if we take these labels, I am an introvert, I am an extrovert, and that then becomes an obstacle to us choosing to live in a way that may matter to us. Like if I care about social connection, maybe I want to push myself to get out there and be more social rather than say, well, I'm an introvert, so I'm just not going to do that.
Absolutely. And I hear people do this all the time, and I'm always on the lookout for it, because I think if we are too rigid and inflexible about how we define ourselves, that just limits what we can do in our lives and how we can live fully. And I do, it's funny, I think I've heard so many people say, and I read this in like essays and that kind of thing, where it's like, well, I'm an Enneagram 8-9, or like, I don't even really know what that means. I've taken it. It's fun, or I'm an ENTP from the Myers-Briggs. And it's like, okay, you can maybe take those and they're fun and they're interesting. But when people, it's almost like, this is who I am. This defines me. I always get kind of upset by that, because I'm like, you are more than your Enneagram. Like, you are a human who gets to make choices in the world. And so I like to address it from a psychological flexibility. And Olga really did that in her story of how she noticed there were some of these constructs that maybe were her tendencies, but she didn't want to be boxed in by them anymore. So she changed them. And that is such a beautiful example of psychological flexibility.
100%. And you used the word choice. And I always feel like choice is kind of one of the most important words in ACT and in cultivating psychological flexibility. And if you don't mind me sharing, like I just said, you and I each took this test, and you were high on all the things, but low on conscientiousness. And you joked with me, this is why I'm so bad with my email. And so one thing I was thinking is like, you could take that and be like, oh, well, this is just who I am. So I'm just going to let my email be a mess, right? Or you can go, okay, this is something I don't love about myself. And so I'm going to work on that. But like, maybe it lends itself to a little more self-compassion.
Yes. And I will tell you, it's funny you mentioned this, because my absolute lowest one was organization. And when I was listening to the episode, you talked about your son and how somebody who's low on conscientiousness doesn't feel very driven. Like, I have no interest in becoming super conscientious. I'm just like, no, that's never going to be me. But I also literally plan my day, because I have to function in the world. And that is not something that I enjoy or that comes naturally to me. But I have compensated. And I've compensated by going out of my way to put effort into organizing myself and my life, even though I don't really particularly
like where it's important to you. Right? Yes. Like, I think that's where that flexibility comes in, is like, I don't have to try really hard to be so over the top something I'm not in areas that don't matter, but where it matters. Maybe you want to show up on time. Maybe you want to make sure you don't miss meetings because you value other people's time. And so that's something you work on, even if it doesn't come naturally to you. But like making your bed, who cares? Right? Like that kind of thing. But there again is the choice.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Well, thanks, Debbie, for joining me in the co-host post. We hope you all got a lot out of this episode. Thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, You can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.